So our next presenters are Marta Samokishyn and Victoria Tsonos. And Marta and Victoria's presentation called Assessing the Impact of Students' Engagement and Mental Health on Academic Integrity During the COVID-19 Pandemic is going to discuss correlations between students' mental health and engagement and students' attitudes and beliefs regarding academic integrity. So take it away, Marta and Victoria.
Thank you so much for coming to our presentation. We're really glad to be here with you today. So we're going to be talking about the student side of experiencing COVID and how it has affected their academic integrity. So as Ali mentioned, our title of the presentation is Assessing the Impact and Mental Health on Academic Integrity During COVID-19 Pandemic.
We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we are located is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
My name is Marta Samokishyn, and I'm a collection development and liaison librarian at St. Paul University in Ottawa, Ontario.
My name is Victoria Tsonos, and I'm the head of user services librarian at St. Paul University, also in Ottawa.
Today we're going to start with a little bit of introduction and delivery context for our research problem. Then we'll talk about our study design, so our methodology and questionnaire, and then the results of what the students had to say, and we'll conclude with the lessons learned. I wanted to say this as David Levy asked in the pandemic pedagogy group question, what is your plagiarism story? We know that every librarian probably has a plagiarism story that they could share, so we're going to share ours today.
So firstly, we're going to go through the introduction, delivery context, and our research problem.
Why did we do this study? So essentially, COVID-19 has brought unprecedented times in higher education and has severely affected both students and faculty. So in our institutions, we have seen a dramatic increase in academic fraud cases on campus, which has increased by almost 300%. So we wanted to look at was there a significant difference in mental health stress related to COVID-19 and engagement in those students who committed academic fraud. What we have seen is that with regards to COVID and mental health is that a US study indicated there was 71% of college students that had increased stress anxiety during pandemic, and 18% admitted having suicidal thoughts. And then another study from France suggested that disengagement was primarily related to the social isolation of students during COVID-19 pandemic, among other factors.
So for some context, St. Paul University is a small bilingual Catholic university, and we have 4 faculties: human sciences, theology, philosophy, and canon law. So for this project, we worked with the largest faculty, which is that of human sciences, which represents about 63% of our students. The reason we worked with human sciences is because back in 2018, the university sort of reworked how we were going to do different processes of academic fraud and include the library in 2 of those practices. So the first one is the pedagogical approach. The second one is accelerated process. So the pedagogical approach is for first-time offenses only, and it's typically run by the professors. And then you have the accelerated process, which is for repeat or severe first offenses, and then the regular process, which is for repeat offense. So we participated in the pedagogical as well as the accelerated process. So for the pedagogical approach, a student can receive 1 or more of the following sanctions. So they will first receive a written warning. They will then have to, could participate in a mandatory individual workshop on academic integrity offered by the library. They could have to redo the assignment correctly, as well as you can lower the work's final grade or any other measures that are considered appropriate for the circumstances. So we participated in the section where we provide mandatory academic integrity workshops at the library, and we've been doing that since 2018. And since then, during the COVID pandemic, we have seen a dramatic increase in mandatory workshops that we have given for first-time offenses in academic integrity. So for example, in 2018-2019, we saw 18 students. In 2019-2020, we saw 13. And then from May 2020 to April of 2021, we saw 30 students. And from 2021 to 2022, we saw 27 students. So we did have an increase of students who did come to the library due to a first offense in plagiarism. And that doesn't even represent all of the students who have committed plagiarism in the last 2 years. That's just the ones that we've seen.
So when doing literature findings on this topic and going through the literature review, we found several interesting things. So prior to pandemic, several studies mention that negative emotions and stress were predictors for plagiarism. And then many authors also outline that the increase in cases of academic fraud during pandemic was linked to emergency remote learning and specifically assessment design and implementation. So we have seen a lot of those studies coming up recently. And what was also interesting is that according to some authors, cultivating a sense of belonging and empathy is closely related to students knowing the regulations and thus being less likely accused in academic fraud. So let's talk a little bit about study design, our methodology and questionnaire. So we developed a bilingual mixed method questionnaire that was based on 2 verified assessment instruments. So the Attitudes Towards Plagiarism questionnaire and University Students Engagement Inventory. We adapted those 2 verified assessment instruments and also added several questions on the students' experience of COVID-19 pandemic. Our questionnaire took 15 minutes roughly to complete. We had 2 different groups of students. So we had students who actually participated in the library workshops, and we asked them right after the workshop to complete the questionnaire. And then we had also a general population as a control group. We had roughly about 10% response rate from the general population, and we were really pleased with that. So in terms of study results, what did our students have to say?
So based on our study results, so we had a total of 135 students in the control group, the students who had not indicated that they had committed academic fraud, and 19 students who did indicate that they committed academic fraud. Amongst the groups, we had roughly the same amount of men and women, as well as the same amount of students who were international students versus domestic students. Very similar in terms of undergraduate versus graduate students. And then we are a small university. We have roughly 1,300 students, and we also tend to have a lot of mature students. So the age range is also very evenly distributed between 18 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 44. So one of the things that we tried to measure were students' levels of stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. So we had them rated on a scale of 1 to 100, and about 79.4% of students indicated that their levels of stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion were at 50 or above. So we can see that students did indicate in the last 2 years of having significant levels of stress and anxiety. Some of the largest stressors that they indicated were their health of their family and friends due to COVID-19, as well as their health due to COVID-19 and isolation related to COVID-19. Some other stressors were the fact that they were experiencing reduced concentration. They indicated that they were experiencing reduced in focus, the lack of sleep that was contributing to their anxiety, low energy, having too much screen time was causing them to exhibit anxiety and stress. Also having lack of space to study or focus on schoolwork, just general anxiety. And we even had one student who indicated that they were, during the COVID-19 pandemic, diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder that was directly related with the stressors that they were experiencing at university. So some of what the students said, so they said globally stress was increased and it added roadblocks to my efficiency and desire to learn. It made me more tired. I felt like quitting my studies many times. it was hard to focus. I had little motivation to do anything school related. It felt like a waste of time. And then we have another quote from a student that's in French that I'll sort of paraphrase in English. So they just said that they had no motivation or interest to continue their studies. They didn't experience sort of any interaction and just sort of felt overall fatigue, not just from themselves, but from everyone around them.
We also have asked students about the impact of COVID-19 on their engagement during their studies. And so what was interesting is that we have seen that students who committed academic fraud have slightly higher disengagement than students who did not, so 76% versus 60%, but overall both groups did experience issues with engagement due to COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the factors the student mentioned with regards to disengagement were Zoom fatigue. So Zoom fatigue was one of the major factors the students have identified as something contribute to their disengagement, lack of interaction with their peers and their professors, lack of connection. So that was also a big one. They did not feel like they had a home school separation, and also they felt like they were easily distracted, so they could not necessarily focus on their schoolwork. They had to take frequent breaks. And when it comes to academic integrity, we had very interesting results as well.
So we looked at whether students had received any sort of academic integrity education prior to this study. So the majority of students, over 70%, indicated that the professors did address academic integrity in some way in their class. Now, we don't know if this is sort of in an in-depth way or if it's just referring to the academic integrity regulations. And then when we looked at the students who committed academic fraud versus the students who did not, we saw that slightly more of them had never attended a library workshop or didn't know that the library offered workshops on academic integrity versus the people who had not committed plagiarism indicated that slightly more of them were aware that the library offered sessions on academic integrity. What we also saw is we asked students if they felt that COVID-19 had an impact on their academic integrity or plagiarism views. And what was interesting is that the majority of those who did not commit academic integrity strongly disagreed that they felt that COVID-19 had an impact on their academic integrity values or views, whereas the majority of the students who did plagiarize or did have a sanction strongly agreed that COVID-19 did have some sort of impact on academic integrity and their views of plagiarism.
We also asked students what factors they think might have led somebody to plagiarize. So here we saw very similar answers relatively in both groups. So the most common one, they thought that students might not have known the requirements of the citation style or were unaware of academic integrity regulations regarding plagiarism. So another very interesting factor was that a lot of students in both groups felt like stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion could be the factor leading students to plagiarize. And then we can see all these other factors, including lack of time, desire for better grades, easy access to internet sources, etc.
This is a 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Then we asked them about their attitudes and beliefs about academic integrity, and this is where we had a dramatic difference between both groups. So as you can see here, students who were accused in plagiarism thought that penalty for plagiarism was unfair, and the first instance of plagiarism should have milder sanctions. A lot of them also said that the instructor's expectations were too high, and that during stressful times, such as COVID-19 pandemic, academic fraud can be justified. So you can see there was a huge difference in percentages between the group that plagiarized and the general control group. We also have seen, in terms of attitudes, that there was a dramatic difference between those students who considered that plagiarism rules were too strict, so again 31.5% versus 7%, and those who say that they have we asked them if they agreed with the statements. Those who say that they have never plagiarized are lying, so again dramatic difference between 26 and 9%. Interestingly enough, when we asked them if they agreed with the statements that reusing their own work should not be punishable, 35% of students from the control group said yes. So what that tells us is that students are really in need of the academic integrity interventions from librarians as well as their professors. So they might not be aware of all the academic integrity regulations here.
So a couple of final reflections. So basically in concerning academic integrity in the pandemic, so most students who did not plagiarize indicated that the pandemic did not change their attitudes or beliefs towards plagiarism and academic integrity compared to those who did commit some sort of academic fraud. A few students who plagiarized suggested that stress definitely contributed to them committing plagiarism and academic fraud. And some students who plagiarized also mentioned that they felt like they didn't have the opportunity to attend many workshops or to ask questions from their professors or really to get in-depth help because of the pandemic, again, because of Zoom fatigue and because of trying to navigate sort of online spaces. Some of the quotes that we got from students who did plagiarize, they said that given the extreme amount of stress and depression, I was not able to focus enough to avoid the alleged plagiarism. Another student said, with so much stress and not having the ability to concentrate and the fear to ask for more extensions when you got extensions already triggered my attitudes towards plagiarism. And then we have one student, again in French, which I'll paraphrase, that said that ever since learning turned to online, they have no more interest in the program or even in school in general. They are basically studying right now just to finish. They said that they had plans to apply to graduate school, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they've decided to end their academic career after their bachelor's degree. So some of the lessons that we learned from this study and implications for future practice. So as we can see, students felt a high level of stress and anxiety due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has definitely affected their learning. We had some students who liked online learning, but the majority of the students definitely struggled with it. They struggled with attention issues, lack of focus, and disengagement, which in turn could have affected their attitudes towards plagiarism and academic integrity, especially those who did receive a sanction. For the majority of the students, they believe that plagiarism was caused by a lack of awareness of the academic integrity policy, lack of awareness of citation styles, but also stress and anxiety. And we've also seen that we as librarians can be doing more to support our students and sort of help them through this and navigate the pandemic that we're still going through and try and help lower the instances of academic integrity and academic fraud.
So moving forward, these are several things that we wanted to consider moving forward. So we don't really know the long-term effect of COVID on attention, concentration, modes of instruction. This is something that requires additional research. Second, we strongly felt that pedagogy of care needs to be applied for the cases, especially when we feel like, students who are stressed or disengaged, we can intervene before the academic fraud occurs. Collaboration between librarians and faculty and continuous support of students throughout the library workshops, this is something that needs to be addressed as well. And specifically in the case of our institutions, we are going to implement mandatory academic integrity online modules starting this September, and also anti-plagiarism software, and we are looking forward to see how that changes the instances of academic fraud on campus. And we would like to finish with this quote, that too often violations of academic integrity are canary in the coal mine moments for students who are struggling, often because of systemic inequities that undermine their sense of belonging and their understanding of how to university. Thank you so much for coming to our sessions today. We are happy to take any questions right now. And if you want to talk to us later, please don't hesitate to email any time. We would be happy to talk to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So we do have a question in the chat already, and it says, as an odd question, had you ever surveyed the students' level of library anxiety as per Sharon Bostic prior to the pandemic?
We have not, and this is something that actually I always was interested in looking at, but we have not done this now.
Okay, so if anyone else has any questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat or the Q&A now. I don't see anything in the Q&A, so if I'm somehow missing them, do let me know. So I guess I can ask a question then if there aren't any other questions. So what do you guys see as like an ideal for the future of academic integrity pedagogy? Like, how do you see this going forward in the like best possible case?
Yeah, so basically what I see is that we need to, a lot of students when they come to the library after having received a sanction feel a lot of shame. Again, like Marta expressed in the quote, like it's sort of like one thing on top of the other. So already you're feeling stressed and then you receive this sanction and it kind of feels like you can't do anything right. So I either see students who get really frustrated and down on themselves and feel like it's not worth it anymore, or students that just get sort of really frustrated and angry. And I think we have to come at it at a different place in terms of, it's not necessarily a you did something wrong and this is a punishment, but of, okay, how can we deal with this, not just in an academic integrity standpoint, but also a wellness standpoint? Like, what is it that's going on in your life that maybe could have brought to this that we can help you out with? Or what's something that we can do as a preventative measure to sort of embed ourselves more within our students and within classes, within faculty, so that they know of all of the different regulations, so that they can sort of prevent them from this happening for a first time or second time.
One of the parts in your presentation that I kind of related to was the not knowing how to university, because I feel like when I was in undergrad, I didn't know about all these services that the library provided and these informational sessions and stuff, because I was just so overwhelmed. And I think that something that could be important in some of this kind of stuff is to reduce stress on students and less pressure to finish in 4 years kind of thing, you know, like all of those kinds of things would help students maybe have more mental capacity to put the time into these kinds of sessions, you know?
Definitely. And also even just in the way that we think about assignments and we think about sort of like research sharing and research sharing, right? Like we have these sort of views on academic integrity have been around for so long and kind of have not evolved in the sense of how we have evolved in terms of resource sharing, and how can we look at that, and what are the different ways that we could view some of the assignments that we're giving students, or some of the ways in which students conduct research that could alter the way that we view plagiarism and academic integrity.